Hey gang, Mary Rose here. It's Wednesday. It's 1 p.m. Pacific time. I'm so glad to be here with you. If you're watching on Facebook, go to streamyard.com/Facebook. Give permission to show your name. If you don't do that, it's fine too. Then you're not showing your name, but I will address you respectfully and affectionately as Facebook user because that's how your name will come across to me. But it's totally up to you whether you want to be seen or not seen. But this is a live stream and I love to be able to interact with you. And I'm just going to jump in the comments already and say hello. Tracy from Anchorage, Alaska is here. Awesome to have you here, Tracy. What a treat. Hey, Erin, zooming in from New York City. Very good. And from Wisconsin. Hey, I love that you're sharing where you're from. One of the fantastic things about being able to teach and mentor online, as I've been doing now for a few years since founding the Path of the Storyteller program, is that my students come from all over. It's such a blessing. It's so interesting to all of us. We learn from each other. It's not just an echo chamber of people who've come through the same backgrounds and stuff like that. It's really diverse and fascinating to bring together storytellers from a lot of different places, a lot of different worldviews, a lot of different levels of experience. It just makes everything richer and more fun. Hey, Nancy's here too, and it is just a party happening in the comments. I love it. So allow me to join the party myself with a formal introduction. I'm Mary Rose Wood. This is my weekly live stream at Wednesday at 1 p.m. Pacific time. It is a place where we gather to talk about story structure, writing craft, the mindset of the working writer. And many of the folks here are people that I've just met through this live stream, which happens on YouTube. It also is broadcast into the Path of the Storyteller Facebook group. And so many of you have become students and are people that I know and love and know your work. And we're really just creating a nice synergy of writers, encouraging each other and holding each other up. So it just makes me so glad to be here with you. All right. So what have I got in store today? I touched upon a topic kind of quickly last week when I met with the Storytellers Circle, which is the membership group for people who've been through the Path of the Storyteller program and are alums, and then go into a kind of a monthly experience of meeting with me every once a week for a kind of a live coaching session, submitting hot seats for group discussion, and just, kind of keeping our tools sharp, deepening our training, all that good stuff. And by the way, since I'm talking about it, if anybody is watching this either live or on the replay, I would love you to get over to the Path of the Storyteller website at www.pathofthestoryteller.com and get on the mailing list, because you will start to learn more about the offerings there and the very cool community that we have going. So that's just a little something for you to put on your to-do list. So every Friday, we've always got lots to talk about. It's such an amazing group, an amazing community. And I came across something that I wanted to talk about. This is great for me as well, right? Because I get to get things off my chest. Something happens during the week. I read something. I get excited. I want to discuss it with my fellow writers. And this is the thing that came up for me last week. I have finished, and I've talked about this book before. I'm going to hold it up again. George Saunders' wonderful collection, A Swim in a Pond in the Rain. It's a collection of essays that are based on his reading of a really good selection of Russian short stories from the greats, Tolstoy, Chekhov, that ilk. And he presents the stories. He does a very close read and interpretation. And George Saunders is a wonderful writer himself, and he teaches writing. And so his interpretation is skewed toward writers. It's skewed toward offering a little advice, guidance, stuff to think about that we might use to improve our own work. So I love this kind of book. This is my idea of a beach read. And in fact, I did a live stream inspired by an idea that I came across in this book about whether the calling, the act of writing fiction actually makes us better people, which I will link to that live stream below or up in the cards or however it works, so that you can check that out as well. Of course, the conclusion there is that in a way it does force us to be better people, because we have to imagine ourselves in a more capacious way. We have to grapple with our relationship to humanity in a larger way to write really good fiction. So that's the kind of stuff that Saunders gets into and that we talk about. And it's really compelling. It's really deep. Here's the thing. I got to the very end of the book and I absolutely loved it. And I'd already recommended it to lots of folks that I know. And I came across something that I didn't agree with. It was so interesting. I was like, George Saunders and I are parting ways for just this one moment, because I'm a huge fan of his. And I wanted to talk about it. So I brought it in to the Storyteller Circle on Friday. We had a really great discussion, but we also had a lot of other things to talk about. So I wasn't really satisfied. And I thought this will be a great thing to do on Wednesday. Some of you who are in Storyteller Circle heard a little bit of this already, but most of you haven't. And so we're going to go into it. It has to do with a very particular question about revision, but in a more theoretical way. How do we as writers know when something is good, when it works, when we've got it just so? How do we know when it's not there yet? And how do we know how to make it better? Like this sort of question of where's our taste coming from? Where's our sense of what needs to change actually coming from? And how do we deploy it? How do we actually put it into practice? And then once we have deployed it, how do we know when we can stop? When is it good enough? When is it perfect? When does it not need to change anymore? Very interesting question. Very interesting question. I see Tracy in the comments. It is a book called A Swim in the Pond in the Rain by George Saunders. And I will link it in the notes below the video, so you can always come back and find it. All right. So are we ready to talk about a little swim in the pond in the rain? The moment, the first moment, it actually is quite near the very end of the book, where George Saunders and I kind of gaze at each other through the page and say, is that what you think? Because I think something different. All right, let's do it. I am going to share. Actually, I'm going to do two things at once here. I'm going to make a little space. Make a little space to bring up the quotes from George Saunders. How's that? There we go. Like magic, it happens. All right. What I'm going to do, I'm going to leave this up, and then I'm actually going to read the paragraph that this comes from, because I think a little more context is always good. And this is George Saunders just describing his own environment that he writes in his writing shed, as he calls it. There's a chair out there holding open the door. It's hot and a fan in the doorway is blowing in some cooler air. And there's a hose I ran over here to water a plant, some kind of succulent, the exact name of which I don't know, that we bought last month at Home Depot, to which I try to whisper something encouraging as I come in here every morning. The hose is lying out there, pale green in the hot sun. And now he addresses the reader directly. It is not, by the way, greenish looking on this hot sunny day. It's pale green in the hot sun. Why? Because it's better that way. Why is it better? Because I prefer it. All right, so that's the context for these two quotes. I hope everybody's still with me. If you have questions, you just pop them in. I can always repeat stuff. That's the beauty of being live with you. So the end of that passage is the hoses lying out there, pale green in the hot sun. But Saunders takes a moment to tell us what it's not. What it's not is the hoses lying out there, greenish looking on this hot sunny day. So what he's offering to us is an example of the fact that when he was drafting this, or as one assumes that when he was finished revising it, the sentence that he decided upon was this second sentence, the one, on the far end of the screen. The hoses lying out there, pale green in the hot sun. But then he makes sure that we know that there's another version of this sentence that he found less good. Maybe it was his first draft. Maybe this is the way it came out and he adjusted it. And so what I want to examine for a moment is this question of why this second version is in his mind the one that he says he prefers. Now, there are some very obvious differences between these two sentences, and it's always really instructive to zoom in to this level of detail because you can just literally see very plainly. There's no interpretation required. We can see the difference. The hose is lying out there. Okay, that part is the same. The opening clause is the same. Greenish looking. Now, the second version doesn't say greenish looking. It says pale green. So I would say we all can tell that that's one of the differences between the two versions of the sentence. Greenish looking versus pale green. So hold on to that in your mind. Then there are a few more words in the sentence. The less preferred version, according to Saunders, is on this hot sunny day. And the more preferred version is in the hot sun. So I'm just going to leave this for a second so you can take this in. We're looking at the difference between greenish looking and pale green. And then we're also looking at the difference between on this hot sunny day and the improved, according to Saunders, in the hot sun. Now, I'm going to go to the next slide, so you don't have to memorize this. It's going to still be up. So what have I added here? I've added a list of terminology, and I'm going to go over these with you one by one so that you can see where Saunders and I, really agree and disagree, because here's where I agree with him. I agree with him that the version that is now in the center of the screen, the hose is lying out there, pale green in the hot sun, is the better version. We can call it the revised version. It's what he thinks is better. And I agree with him. It's better. I don't need to think too much about the fact that it's better because, like Saunders, I've been writing for a long time. And I can sort of tell, yeah, that's better. That's the way it should go. Greenish looking on this hot sunny day, clunkier, whatever. You can come up with just judgmental words. It's less good, right? But when Saunders says it's because he prefers it that way, that's where I start to disagree, because I work with so many of you so closely, and I've worked with so many writers so closely. And if I tell them, you'll know how to revise when you write a bunch of sentences that are sort of the same, and then you choose which one you prefer, they would look at me like I was crazy, and they should, because it's not really very practical advice, is it? We can talk about where our taste comes from and where our ear comes from, but the truth is that we may not ourselves may not be operating at a level of taste and ear that would automatically lead us to knowing at a glance, without any conscious analysis, which is the preferred version. And there's also something about process that needs to be said, which is that until you revise, all you have is the mediocre version. And so if you could just imagine only having the hoses lying out here, greenish looking on this hot sunny day, and knowing perhaps by close observation of your own reaction to it, do I prefer it? Do I not prefer it? How does it make me feel? You might say, I feel like it could be better, but the good version doesn't exist yet. So it's a kind of a different exercise than comparing the two and saying what's different, all right? But since Saunders has already done the revision for us, I want to just take a couple of minutes to go over what's my list of what I would tell my students, and what I do tell my students, as they could affirm, as they could back me up on. There is a list of things that we can look at, and it's a very partial list. Writing craft has a lot to it. But when I look at the exact changes that Saunders made between the two, I see very particular techniques of writing craft being put to use. So let's just go over them. The first one is what I call don't say it twice. Now, this is something that I teach my students as part of a kind of a package of techniques about how you know what to cut, how you know where you've overwritten, and how to get the needless words out of your writing. Now, in what way has Saunders said it twice? I think that qualifies as the writing craft technique that explains why hot sunny day and in the hot sun, one turned into the other. It's on this hot sunny day has been sort of streamlined into the hot sun. If the sun is hot, it's a hot sunny day. So the pertinent information here is that we have a hot sun. Hot sunny day, it couldn't be a hot sunny night, could it? I mean, it's just we sort of get into the like extra words. So he's made the point about the day in a laborious way with some extra. So that's what we mean by don't say it twice. Often we say things with duplication of meaning. We're really trying to make a point, and so we say it twice. Writers do this all the time. It's totally great. Do it in your drafts. Let your drafts say things 3 times, 4 times. Like have a good time finding all the ways to say it. But when we revise to find our preferred version, we definitely want to just say it once. Okay. Now, the next one is interesting. I call it be specific. Be specific. Now, if you remember the paragraph of context that I read to you before bringing up the slide, you'll remember how incredibly full of specific details Saunders' writing is. It's one of his great strengths. It's one of the reasons he's such a good writer. He knows how to weave in a detail, whether it's a trip to Home Depot or, or the succulent that he, waves a little encouragement to every time he comes in and out of the studio. He loves good details, right? So he understands this. So when we say be specific, we're looking to see if anything is just a little muddy, a little generic. Can it be made clearer? Here's a way to characterize that for yourself. Does your reader know exactly what to imagine? Is it so specifically described that all of your readers are imagining the same thing? So does greenish looking pass that test? That's my question for you. If I took 10 of you and I said, greenish looking, what do you imagine? I think that you could conceivably come up with a lot of different things. But if I tell you pale green, all of a sudden we're mostly on the same page. And so to me, the change from greenish looking to pale green is an increase in specificity. And so therefore, by using our writing craft that reminds us to be specific, we've improved the writing. All right. So even with those 2 little techniques of writing craft, we already see an elevation in the writing. Now, here's one that writers love to think about, and you can certainly take this overboard. So I don't mean to, again, create like a law or a rule. When it comes to the realm of making art, we're looking at technique, we're looking at principles, but obviously it's not like the writing craft police are going to come get you if you do something that's on this list. But here's my 3rd bullet point. Be suspicious of ing verbs. Be suspicious of the dreaded present participle. Now, what do I mean by this? It's my experience that writers will often use the ing verb form, the continuous verb form, or if you want to nerd out on your grammar, the present participle, when they don't really need it. They don't really need to indicate that there's something that's going on in this, a continuous way. There's just a kind of a fondness for having more on the page. It's like, if we got paid by the letter, it's like, oh, I could add ing. It's like playing the Scrabble, right? Someone plays a word and you think I could add ed, I could add an s or ing and get lots of bonus points, and they've done most of the work already. Same principle, right? So there's an appetite for adding more. And so writers will sometimes have an inclination to use phrases like greenish looking when they just mean green. They they just mean it. You know, it's green. I mean, there's almost a saying it twice factor going on there as well. What's the difference between saying something is green and saying it's greenish looking? It's not, you're not really adding concrete information for the reader's benefit. So I say, you know, let's get rid of all that extra and that fluffiness. And we have to look when we've used an ing verb if it's really what we want, or perhaps there is a simple active verb form that's going to tighten things right up. So I believe that pale green beats greenish looking any day of the week. And I'm just going to look at the comments quickly. If anybody's having any questions, that you just pop them in and I'll weave them into the discussion, because I know that I'm sort of going through a lot of technique right now. Now, here's a favorite one of mine. Use one syllable words. It's so interesting, isn't it? When we are young, and I mean like when we're students in school, we are encouraged to use big words because that's the ones we get tested on. Those are our vocab words. And when we study writing at school, our teachers are so proud of us being able to, you know, use multiple clauses, you know, build a more complex sentence structure. We learn how to do this. We're taught how to do it, and we have to show that we know how to do it. And so we start to feel rewarded for using long words and complicated sentence structures. Now, anyone who knows my books, you know that I love my long words and I love my complicated sentence structures. I'm not necessarily recommending that we all need to reduce ourselves to like Hemingway levels of discipline. But one syllable words are magic. And there's a reason for this. You know, I would say there's two reasons for this. One syllable words are often, in English, are often derived from an Anglo-Saxon etymology. English is a wonderful buffet of words from all different sources. Most languages are fairly absorptive that way. They take words from other languages and make them our own, but English really has a lot of sources for the words that we have. And so one of our great sources of language is the Romance languages, sort of based on Latin mostly, and they come typically through French iterations, or Italian through French. They ended up in Old English, Middle English, they turn into modern English. You know, it's always really interesting to look at where words come from. But so these Romance words, because they originate in Latin, they tend to be longer, and they just have, in a sense, a softer rhythm because they're multisyllabic. You know when you see one, right? Anglo-Saxon words are the ones that come from the northern parts of Europe, the Germanic sources, right? These are good Viking words. And they often have really great consonant sounds, and a lot of them have like this one syllable punch. And so what you get when you choose one syllable words in English is that you get a really a nice refresh in the rhythm of your prose, because English does tend to want to, you know, rely on Romance words a lot. And you improve the rhythm, and you will often, and that's not so much the case here, but you will often get a word that has a really good sound, that has a kind of an auditory quality with like really good consonants, or some feeling. Like the sound of the word sometimes is enough to wake up the reader and give them a feeling. Like a strike on a drum, you know, just like watching a parade go by, you know, you feel the drum beat in your body. So one syllable words, as fiction writers, they're wonderful. Like they're really, really useful. So let's not try to please our high school English teachers anymore. Let's try to please our readers. We shouldn't be shy about using one syllable words. And now that I've pointed that out, right, at this great length, you can see that this sentence, the revised sentence, is one of the reasons that it feels so good and almost like there's nothing more to do to it, is that it's so dependent on one syllable words. Let's see how it comes out. The hose is lying out there, pale green in the hot sun. So in the entire sentence, They're all one syllable words, except for the word lying, right? So all of a sudden, the word lying, it has like a little spotlight on it. We start to think like poets. Lying is the one that has like a little lift to it, where there's a little breath in the sentence. The sentence has a shape. It has like a point to it. The hose is lying out there, pale green in the hot sun. Boom. It just sounds so good. Compare that to a sentence where one syllable words and two syllable words are just mixed up willy-nilly. There's no word that's like the star of the show. The hose is lying out there, greenish looking on this hot sunny day. So we have lying, greenish looking, and sunny. Nobody gets to be the star of the show. Like nobody's special. So the rhythm of this less preferable sentence actually is just, it feels very random, where the rhythm of the preferred sentence feels completely intentional. It has this solidity about it. Now, George Saunders says that that's because he prefers it that way. But I just want to point out that these are all kind of precepts of writing craft that I can give you on a checklist. In fact, I have given them to you on a checklist. Here it is on the screen. I teach my students this stuff. They have a checklist with all this stuff, right? It's interesting. Let me just do the last one, and then we'll talk about this more, in a more general way. The last bullet point, as you can see, is the word compress. Compression is so essential. Like it's one of the things that when we revise, we must always be looking to see how we can say what we want to say with nothing extra in the most compressed possible way. Now, is that because readers are busy and they like short books? Well, I mean, it's true that readers are busy, and maybe some readers like short books, some readers like long books. It's not so much about that. It's about the pace of the storytelling. Because if the reader is reading and it takes a paragraph to make a description or a beat of storytelling happen, the reader's train of thought is actually moving more quickly than the prose. And as soon as the reader gets ahead of us, they are losing interest. We tend to underestimate how fast the reader's mind is clicking along. They want us to keep up with them. They don't want to feel like they're just, digging through excess verbiage, looking for the story, looking for the details, looking for the good stuff. So it's our job, and this is something that we do in revision. So after we've solved a lot of the other problems of the work, we've got our storytelling where we want it, we know what our scenes are, all this other stuff. When it comes to the end of revision, one of the things we're going to do is take out everything that's not absolutely essential. And we can compress in a variety of ways. Not saying stuff twice is one of them. Using one syllable words whenever we can is one of them. There's other stuff that we can look at as well. And this is a whole module in the Path of the Storyteller program that we look at all the ways that you can compress prose. But I would say to my buddy George, you can say that you know that this is better because you prefer it. But if I gave one of my students, or really most any, a dedicated writer, this first example, the hose is lying out there, greenish looking on this hot sunny day, and I said, improve it, they're going to need more than just do what you prefer. Find what you prefer. It's very helpful to have actionable principles of writing craft that you can take and look at the work. And you can right away say, okay, I see some ing verbs. I see a little bit of saying stuff twice. There's like a real needless use of two-syllable words when one-syllable words could do. I think the whole thing could be a little compressed. A person who's a little bit trained, has some writing craft at their disposal, can look at it and diagnose it in a very clear way. And then guess what? You know exactly how to fix it. You know exactly how to fix it. So that's my respectful disagreement with George. So I'm going to take this down now. Much as I love being so small in the corner, I love being so small in the corner. It's like a magic, very much so. And we'll get ourselves back to where we usually are. So I'm going to take a quick look at the comments and see. Great. You guys have shared the name of the book. That's wonderful. Great. Now, so some really great comments here. Let me deal with some of these, and then I'll do a little kind of concluding wrap up. One of the things that Cynthia brings to the table, and hi, Cynthia, it's great to have you here. The greenish looking feels somewhat at a remove. And then she says that she forgets what we call that. Well, there is a term, filtering, that we talk about as a point of writing craft. And it is putting the stuff that you're presenting to the reader at somewhat of a remove by filtering it through an observer. Now, greenish looking it's not what I would technically call a filter, but you're quite right, Cynthia, in that it's implies that someone's looking at this green in addition to the reader. Like greenish looking, to whom is it greenish looking, right? So all of a sudden there's like a kind of an invisible moderator between the events that are being described in the language and the reader, who ideally should be getting the vivid, unfiltered, unmediated experience of what's happening in the prose. Like that's what makes fiction vivid. So thank you so much for raising this point of what happens when we put stuff at a remove. Now, Anne has a really terrific question, and it's about Jane Austen, which makes it even better. So Anne says she's thinking of Pride and Prejudice. Not that we'll normally be trying to imitate Jane Austen. Well, sometimes we are. Sometimes we are, Anne. It's okay. There are times when we might want to go to that place. But how do you decide when it might work to use longer, more fanciful sentences and words? Great question. And what you're raising is the really significant and valid topic of voice in fiction, right? And when we are working on our books, one of the things that we get to decide, because we're the writers and we're the bosses of our books, is what voice are we going to choose to write this book? And we might have all kinds of reasons about having to do with the tone, the period, the mood. Voice can communicate a great deal. You can tell by the voice of Jane Austen, or P.G. Wodehouse for that matter, that this is a comedy. You can tell by the voice because the narrator has a personality, right? The narrator is basically telling the story with a kind of an archness, a slyness, an intelligence, like a wit. There's a lot of verbal humor there, right? And so when we say use one syllable words, it doesn't mean that you can't use not one syllable words. As I said, I'm in no way prescribing that everybody says, oh, guess we all have to write like Hemingway now. It's like, no, we don't all have to write like Hemingway. But you can use one syllable words intentionally in any voice, because you don't want to use nothing but 3 syllable words. It will turn into like a stream of trills that will just be so unrelenting that it's going to put your reader to sleep. I would argue that when you've got a voice that has a certain amount of Victorian ornamentation about it, that has like crocheted edges and crown molding, and you're doing something that's a little more decorated, I'll say, that your use of short sentences and one syllable words at that point becomes your superpower, because you know exactly when to hit the bell. You know how to put a button on it. You know how to control the rhythm of that kind of language, because it's a choice. You can use longer words and more complicated sentence rhythms, and then you can break them up with short declarative sentences and short words. What I want you to take away from this is that the choices about even things like how long of a word would be optimal for this particular sentence is part of the type of writing craft questions that you as a writer can add to your toolkit. And I'm just curious, before hearing me talk about it, how many of you said, okay, well, one of the things I always check before I really put the finishing touches on a draft is, am I underutilizing one syllable words? Have I over relied on a steady stream of romance words that all start to sound a little doodly 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 do alike after a while? Am I really thinking about the rhythm of my sentences? Am I controlling it consciously? And not just because I said so, because your storytelling is communicating emotion, we hope, right? That's what it's for. And the rhythm of your prose will follow the emotion of what you're writing. So it's actually quite an expressive tool to start to think about these kinds of topics. So we sort of strayed a little bit into two other topics, and one of them is voice and one of them is prose rhythm. And these are both, quite technical, I would say, but not hard. It's just a question of being aware of them, having some writing craft technique, and adding them to the list of things that you consciously think about when you're writing. That is great. And Constanza is here. Hey, Constanza, so great to see you here. Constanza is a fan of reading her work aloud, and it helps her a great deal to decide if she likes the voice, the rhythm, and the sound. I wholeheartedly agree, Constanza. Whenever you're talking about this level of refinement in revision, a read aloud is absolutely essential before you decide that something is done. Really great questions. Really great. I really love all the things you're raising. Tracy, now, Tracy, you and I are absolutely aligned on how delicious certain words are. And of course, I am a Beatrix Potter fan as well. And you think of her description of lettuce as having a soporific effect. You love the feel of the word soporific. It's definitely not an everyday word. Exactly. Now, when you use a word like soporific, it's going to be like a treat that you give the reader. It's there for a reason. Lettuce having a soporific effect. We're in comedy, right? That's funny. And so here's exactly what I'm talking about, because if you have something that's nice and juicy like soporific and you're using it for effect, what you don't want to do is bury that word in the middle of 3 sentences that are all made of words that have that same impact. You're going to want to give soporific a little spotlight by surrounding it with simpler words. So this is what I mean by using this strategically. It's not a rule about using or not using certain kinds of words. It's an invitation to be intentional about these things. And that, to me, is what writing craft is all about. Now, the ones that I chose for the discussion today this is in no way an exhaustive list of writing craft. This list, this few bullet points that I just shared with you, was my personal response as a writer who relies upon writing craft to George Saunders' assertion that he knew that one version was better than the other because he preferred it. But he did not say, here's why I prefer it. I prefer it because the rhythm has been improved by the use of one syllable words and by taking out duplication of meaning. I prefer it because it's compressed. I prefer it because it's a little more specific in the reader's imagination. I've done a better job of leading the reader not to a generic experience, but to a very precise experience. Through my precise use of specific language, I'm creating a precise and specific impact in my reader's imagination. Now, George Saunders didn't say all of that stuff in his passage that I read to you. He just said he preferred it. Now, an experienced writer who knows what's best has probably, there's a lot of mileage. He's written a lot of pages, a lot of books, a lot of stories. He's a master writer. And if his ear knows how to get from one to the other through simply, well, it sounds better to me, that's terrific. I mean, that is, in a sense, the mark of mastery. But what I wanted to really bring forward in this discussion was that we don't start out necessarily having that level of mastery baked into our ear, baked into our taste, if you will. Saunders speaks quite often in this book and elsewhere about his subjective experience of what it is to write and revise. And I find it very recognizable myself. He describes what it feels like to read your own work and to say, not quite there yet. I'm going to nudge that over a little bit. Better. Right. And he talks about this. It's like a close observation of your internal process. How are you yourself reacting to what's on the page? Does it feel like in the pocket, or does it feel like it still needs more work? If you're very experienced, that's a really good thing that you can rely on. And it's true that we all rely on that to a certain extent. I'm sure that you all know what I'm talking about. You're reacting to your own work as you're creating it. You're observing it. And it's part of your growth as an artist to continually refine the nuance with which you observe that little fluctuation of it's getting better, it's getting worse. I think I got it. No, I don't think so. I mean, that's part of experience. That's really part of experience. But we are not, possessed of endless time and immortality to polish up our writing craft. And one of the things that can really help when you're developing is if you actually study writing craft, familiarize yourself with ideas like the ones that I've laid out today. Like, I'm looking for compression. I'm looking for the improving the rhythm of the prose. I'm making sure that I don't say things twice. If you can start to just familiarize yourself, use those types of writing techniques until they start to feel like second nature, then guess what? This more personal process of close observation of your own experience, your own reaction to your own work is going to be better informed. It's going to have a why behind it. There's going to be a reason for your revisions. It's not just going to be because I prefer it. That's a shorthand way of saying all of these other things. Why do you prefer it? Because it adheres to all these like nice reminders about what improves writing. One of the images that I often think of, or comparisons, is what it feels like to learn a second language. We're not fluent right away. In the beginning, we have to think. Sometimes we have to look stuff up. We know the word for this, but we don't know the word for that. Or we know the verb for this, but we can't remember which form to use. And so we're always going back and we're looking stuff up, and it's very laborious. And if we practice, we become more fluent. Now, there may be a significant difference in our fluency of being receptive to a language versus being able to speak a language. I'm sure that those of you who speak multiple languages know that experience of I can read in it, but I can't speak it. It's not my native tongue. I can understand it when people speak to me in it, but if I go to speak, it's not the same level of fluency, right? So there are different levels of fluency when we're receiving the unfamiliar versus when we are the one that has to generate it ourselves. That's the hardest part, is when we have to generate ourselves. To become fluent in conversation is the hardest part. And so I just want to sort of tie this together with that image. When I point out to you that knowing how to identify why George Saunders found the better version preferable is very interesting, and maybe it introduced you to some ideas that were not top of mind, or reminded you of things that you've studied elsewhere or with me, and that's fantastic. But if I didn't give you the revised version and I just gave you that kind of soft, mediocre version, how are you going to get to the revised version just by random testing, right? You're not going to get there too fast. It's not like we're going to write countless versions of the sentence just randomly, the old 100 monkeys at 100 typewriters experiment, and look at these randomly generated varieties of the sentence and say, okay, well, which one do I prefer? That's a very wasteful process, and there's no need for it. There's no need to work that way. You can look at the mediocre version and say, I have a whole list of things that I can use and apply them to this sentence and see if that's something I can improve, right? maybe there's a list of 20 things that you can say, is that something I can improve? Yes. There's so much more, obviously, right? There's so much more. So this is just a little taste of what I mean by it. But trial and error is a slow and painful way to work. It's a slow and painful way to work. And we have to remember that we may be sort of exquisitely attuned to superb writing on the page when other people have already written it. But we have to forgive ourselves for being more fluent as readers than we may be as writers, because that is just the natural way of things. It's as if reading and writing are two different languages, and we have to find a way to orchestrate our fluency as writers. And we want to do it quickly, and we want to do it painlessly. We want to have stuff that we can apply in a practical sense. So that's what this talk is all about. It's basically in praise of writing craft, and having a reason for the revisions that you do. If you're knowing what to look for, you're not just changing them to make them different, you're changing them to make them better. You can fix things with a reason. You can approach your revision with intention and really have a plan for what it is. When I hear writers talk about how they hate to revise, I know right away that they just don't have a good to-do list. They don't have a very clear set of things to do, because revision is so fun, because writing craft is there for you to rely upon. You've got a lot of tools that you can rely upon. And every time you apply one to your work, it gets better. So revision is just a series of saying, oh, that got better. And now that's better. And I fixed that. Boom, boom, boom. And now it's done. And eventually you get to that magic state that George Saunders is in, when you're like, you look at your work and you know there's nothing left to put in and there's nothing left to take out, and you go on to the next sentence. What could be more fun than that? It's a sense of accomplishment. Okay. So one question that does come up, and this will be my last point that I make today, is writers say, yeah, that's great. I'm glad to study writing craft, but it literally feels like so many different things to remember. It just feels like a lot. Does this process ever become organic? Can I ever stop looking at the checklist? And I can say to you, yes, it will become more organic. But one of the reasons that we do a lot of revision in order to get our writing to be in a really finished, polished state is that it is too much to do in a single pass. And it's just too much to do all at once. And so our checklist it's never not useful. We never outgrow writing craft. We just might get more fluent at applying it to our work, but we shouldn't think in terms of it having to be organic. It's not like it makes you a better writer if you can say, I just magically prefer good writing craft. I never have to think of it. I just somehow magically know what to change. Like that, I don't think that's a realistic thing to strive for. Writing's a lot of work. Revision is a lot of work, and I think that that's just what we've signed up for when we decided to write fiction, that we want to please other people. It's like cooking a meal for somebody else. There's no shame in following the recipe. Eventually, once you've made it a lot of times, you won't have to look at the recipe every step of the way. And then you can start to improvise around and, but sometimes you're going to be like, what does it say? What was in the recipe? Like you'll go back to it and you'll say, well, where did I, have I forgotten anything? Or are there ideas in there that are really good ideas that I've somehow neglected in my improvisations to deploy? So that's the way I look at it. Jean Ann asks, might there be a fairly comprehensive list of craft rules that I recommend, or would that be a book? Well, listen, if I knew that there was already a book that had all of this in it, I might not have felt so motivated to create the Path of the Storyteller program, to be perfectly honest with you, Jean Ann. This is the stuff that I teach, and I hope soon that it will be a book. But there are useful craft guides out there. I am a fan of John Gardner's work. He is a kind of a classic old school approach that is nice and strict, which I like. And you can look for some of his books. I think the one that might be helpful is Notes for a Young Writer. Young writer doesn't mean it's for kids. It just means that it's for people who are developing. And I absolutely always recommend, and I know this sounds very collegiate, but if you haven't reread The Elements of Style in a while, please go back to The Elements of Style. It's just an invaluable guide to what constitutes good prose. And that's very helpful. That's very helpful. There's a lot of craft that we apply to writing fiction that is kind of above and beyond the call to write good prose. We're not writing persuasive essays. We're not writing newspaper articles. We have a lot of other stuff to accomplish when we write fiction. And that affects the way we deploy our writing craft, because one of the things we're always looking at is, how is this telling story? But I would say that those are useful. Any of John Gardner's books, there's several of them, and certainly Strunk and White's The Element of Style. It's a great question. I'm glad you asked that. All right. So here's my encouragement to you all. Study writing craft. And as you study it, as you learn things that sound like they might be useful, don't expect them to just happen by osmosis. Like, oh, I read The Elements of Style, so now obviously my writing is going to be better. No, actually, you have to deploy these techniques. You have to sit down with intention and say, okay, now I'm going to do that. I'm going to try it that way. And the minute you start to try it a different way, it's going to feel weird and artificial and like you're imposing something unnatural on your own work. It is an awkward phase and it will pass, but will only pass if you use it. If you really practice it, if you really try to make a habit of using some of the writing craft techniques that you think would be most useful to you. All right. Your inner sense of what's preferred will naturally improve. Your ear will improve. Your taste will improve. But you're never going to completely outgrow the need to think about writing craft, because, it's like you might be really good at driving a car, but that doesn't mean that you should do it with your eyes closed, right? It may feel pretty automatic, but there's still a lot you have to pay attention to. So that's what I got for you. Thank you so much. So many of you here live. Such a great discussion in the comments. I love your questions, and I hope this was of benefit. I'm very grateful to the great George Saunders, and I highly recommend this book, A Swim in the Pond in the Rain. It's particularly good if you are fond of Russian fiction. It's like taking his class in Russian short stories. And so that was a real treat for me to read. And I, humbly thank the imaginary George Saunders, who will probably never see this video, for allowing me to, piggyback a little bit on his work to make a point of my own. All right. As ever, I'm very glad to have you all here. If you're not subscribed to the YouTube channel, please subscribe. If you're not on the Path of the Storyteller mailing list, please get on it. And if you have an idea for something you'd like me to talk about in the future, leave it in the comments, because I love getting ideas from you about the types of questions that are on your mind. Maybe we can help you out by doing a future live stream based on your request. I hope you have happy writing until next time I see you, and I hope that I see you next week. Thanks, everybody.